I've never been the kind of person to scare easily. My friends always joked that I was the one who'd keep a level head in a crisis, the guy who would take charge and calm everyone down. I pride myself on being logical, practical. Fear wasn't something I thought about much, not until that night. It started like any other night in my quiet, comfortable house. I had just finished dinner, a simple pasta dish that I barely remembered tasting, and settled down in front of the TV. I flipped through the channels aimlessly, eventually landing on a crime documentary. It was one of those shows where the narrator's calm voice tells you horrifying stories, making them sound mundane, like reading the news. This one was about home invasions. I wasn't paying much attention at first, but then something caught my ear, a description of how easily burglars slip into homes unnoticed, how they bypass locks, enter through windows, and terrorize unsuspecting families. There were stories of people waking up to find strangers in their bedrooms or discovering that someone had been living in their attic for days without them knowing. I shook my head and laughed. That would never happen to me. I always double-checked my doors before bed, made sure the windows were locked, and had motion sensor lights outside. My house was a fortress, or at least it felt like one. The show ended, and I switched off the TV, feeling a little smug in my security routine as I locked the front door. It was late, probably around midnight, and I wasn't particularly tired, but I headed to bed anyway. I figured I could scroll through my phone for a bit until I drifted off to sleep. After brushing my teeth, I climbed into bed, turning off the bedside lamp. The room sank into darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the streetlights outside, filtering through the curtains. I lay there for a while, my mind wandering over the usual thoughts: work, bills, mundane things. But then I heard something. A soft, almost imperceptible thump. I froze. It was faint, but it was there. At first, I thought it might have been the house settling. Old houses make noises, creaks and groans that you eventually get used to. But this was different. It wasn't the usual creaking of floorboards or the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. This was deliberate, like a footstep. My ears strained in the silence, trying to catch any sound. For a moment, there was nothing, just the heavy stillness of the night. I let out a slow breath, telling myself I was being paranoid. Then it happened again, a thud, closer this time. My heart began to race, my body instinctively tensing. I wasn't alone. I sat up slowly, every nerve in my body on edge. The room was dark, the shadows thick and heavy. My phone was on the nightstand, and I reached for it, but my hand hesitated. What was I going to do? Call the police and tell them I heard a noise? It could be nothing. But the sound came again, and this time it was unmistakable. A slow, deliberate footstep, just outside my bedroom door. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. My house wasn't big. There was no way anyone could be inside without me noticing, unless they had been in here before I went to bed. My mind raced, running through every possible scenario. Maybe someone had slipped in while I was distracted. Maybe they had been waiting, watching me all night. I forced myself to move, creeping out of bed as quietly as I could. My bare feet touched the cold hardwood floor, and I tiptoed across the room, pressing my ear to the door. There it was, breathing, soft, shallow, and deliberate. My own breath caught in my throat. Someone was on the other side of the door. I backed away, heart pounding. My hand clutched my phone so tightly my knuckles ached as I dialed 911. The operator answered quickly, but I kept my voice low, whispering into the phone as I explained the situation. "There's someone in my house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're outside my bedroom door." The operator's calm voice was almost surreal. "Stay where you are, sir. Officers are on their way." I glanced at the door. "How long?" "Just a few minutes," she replied. I didn't have a few minutes. The door handle began to turn. I stared, my blood running cold as the knob rotated slowly, silently. The door creaked open, just a sliver at first, but it was enough to make my breath catch in my throat. A shadowy figure stood in the doorway, tall and still, almost blending into the darkness. I couldn't make out his face, but the glint of metal in his hand told me all I needed to know. A knife. I couldn't move. My mind screamed at me to do something, run, hide, fight, but I was frozen. The figure just stood there, breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling in rhythm. He didn't rush me. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, waiting, like he was savoring the moment. I finally found my voice. What? The figure tilted his head slightly, as if considering the question, but didn't answer. Instead, he took a slow step forward. That was enough to snap me out of my paralysis. I grabbed the nearest object, a lamp from the nightstand, and hurled it at him. It wasn't much, but it was the only thing I could think of. The lamp hit him square in the chest with a dull thud, and he staggered back, but he didn't fall. Then, he laughed. A low, raspy chuckle that sent a wave of terror through me. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I bolted out of the bedroom, sprinting down the hallway toward the front door. Behind me, I could hear his footsteps, slow, deliberate, and unhurried, like he knew I couldn't escape. My hands fumbled with the lock, my fingers trembling as I tried to get the door open. I could feel him getting closer. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Finally, the lock clicked, and I flung the door open, practically throwing myself outside into the cold night air. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. My feet pounded the pavement as I ran down the street, not stopping until I saw the flashing lights of a police car in the distance. Relief washed over me as the car pulled up, and 2 officers jumped out, their guns drawn. I pointed frantically toward the house, my chest heaving as I tried to explain what had happened. "He's inside," I gasped. "He's in the house." The officers didn't hesitate. They rushed inside while I stood there, shaking, trying to catch my breath. Every nerve in my body was still on high alert, and the cold night air felt sharp against my skin, but I couldn't think straight. My mind was stuck on the image of that man, his grin, the malicious glint in his eyes. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I was frozen in that moment, replaying it over and over, wondering how close I had come to real danger. Minutes passed. I paced in the yard, trying to breathe, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My heart was still racing, but the initial surge of adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me cold and shaky. I rubbed my arms, glancing at the officers as they moved from room to room inside my house, their flashlights cutting through the shadows. I half expected to hear shouts, or the clattering sound of someone being caught, but nothing came, only silence. Finally, the front door creaked open, and one of the officers stepped out, his expression tight. He looked at me, then at his partner, as if he didn't quite know how to break the news. "There's no one in there," he said slowly, shaking his head. "We searched the whole house. It's empty." I blinked, my brain refusing to comprehend his words. What I stammered, "No, that's impossible. I saw him. He was in my kitchen. He chased me. I saw him." The officers exchanged glances, clearly thinking I was hysterical. The look in their eyes said it all. They didn't believe me. But I knew what I saw. That man had been inside my house. I could still feel his presence, like a lingering poison in the air. I stood frozen in my room, paralyzed by fear as slow, deliberate footsteps echoed in the hallway outside my door, confirming my worst nightmare. He was still here, lurking in the shadows, taunting me with his presence. My heart raced as I reached for my phone, desperate to call for help, but before I could dial, the door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness. The air felt electric, charged with impending danger, and I was acutely aware that I wasn't just being watched, I was being hunted. The old village of Elder Grove had long been forgotten, swallowed by time and obscured by whispers of its haunted past. It was a place that the world outside had largely ignored, but to me, it was a siren call. I had always been drawn to the macabre, and the rumors of the witch who supposedly dwelled there tugged at my curiosity like an invisible thread. I parked my car at the end of a cracked, overgrown road leading into the village. As I stepped out, a chill settled over me, a creeping sense of unease that was difficult to shake. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dilapidated houses, their windows like hollow eyes watching my every move. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the rustle of branches seemed to whisper secrets long kept. I took my first steps into Elder Grove, the ground crunching beneath my boots, the sound echoing ominously in the silence. The village was a ghost of its former self, with remnants of homes collapsing under the weight of time. Each structure told a story, broken shutters swinging on rusted hinges, weeds overtaking the pathways, and the remnants of fences, splintered and warped, struggling to keep the memories of the past at bay. As I wandered deeper, a low moan of the wind curled through the streets, sounding eerily like a distant lament. I paused, straining to listen. Was it just the wind, or was there something more? Shadows flitted between the trees, and I could have sworn I saw movement in the corner of my eye, but when I turned, there was nothing, only the oppressive stillness. I ventured toward the village square, where an ancient well stood like a sentinel. Its stone walls were thick with moss, and the water inside reflected the sky, dark and unfathomable. I leaned over the edge, peering into the depths, and felt an unsettling sensation as if I were being watched from below. I quickly straightened, shaking my head to clear the strange feeling. The well was just a relic, a remnant of a time long gone. The village square itself was marked by a statue of a woman, long forgotten and worn by the elements. Her features were eroded, and a thick vine wrapped around her like a serpent, giving her an almost sinister appearance. I felt a chill run down my spine as I stared at her. The locals had likely known her well, perhaps they had once revered her. Now she stood as a silent guardian over a forsaken place, shrouded in mystery. As I continued my exploration, the sounds of the forest grew louder, the chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves, and the distant caw of crows. Yet, woven within those natural sounds were other soft whispers that seemed to float on the air, barely audible, but undeniably present. I quickened my pace, feeling a pulse of anxiety thrum in my veins. I stumbled upon what remained of a small tavern, its door hanging off its hinges, creaking as it swung in the breeze. The interior was dark, littered with broken furniture and empty bottles. As I stepped inside, a cold draft rushed past me, sending a shiver through my body. I felt an overwhelming sense of desolation, as if the spirits of the past were trapped within these walls. Suddenly I heard a soft thump from above, as though something heavy had fallen. My heart raced as I turned to face the staircase that spiraled upward into darkness. I took a step back, hesitating, but my curiosity propelled me forward. I couldn't leave without knowing more about this place, this village cloaked in shadows and tales of a witch. I ascended the stairs, each creak of the wood echoing in the stillness. The air grew colder, thickening with a palpable tension that pressed against my skin. I reached the landing and found a narrow hallway lined with doors. Each one was closed, yet I could feel something emanating from behind them, an energy that was both enticing and terrifying. I pressed my ear against one of the doors, straining to hear, but there was only silence. I felt a pang of disappointment, but I couldn't let that deter me. I moved to the next door and pushed it open, revealing a room cloaked in shadows. Old furniture lay in disarray, and the walls were adorned with strange symbols. A chill swept over me as I entered, the air thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something acrid and bitter. I stepped cautiously inside, taking in the remnants of the room. A table sat in the center, cluttered with jars filled with dried herbs and dusty books with cracked spines. I felt a thrill at the thought that perhaps this had been a place of rituals, a sanctum for the witch rumored to inhabit the village. But the thrill was short-lived. A sudden crash echoed from below, and I jumped back, adrenaline flooding my system. I peered out into the hallway, the shadows seeming to dance and pulse with life. It was getting late, and the thought of being trapped in this house as darkness fell was enough to make my heart race. I retreated from the tavern, hurrying back outside. The twilight was deepening, and a thick fog began to roll in from the surrounding woods, enveloping the village in a ghostly embrace. I could barely see the outlines of the buildings as I navigated through the haze, the world around me transforming into an otherworldly landscape. My instincts pulled me toward the grandest house in Eldergrove, the one rumored to belong to the witch. It loomed at the end of the main street, a shadow among shadows. As I approached, I felt a chill in the air, a sense of foreboding that made my skin prickle. The house was more dilapidated than I had imagined, with ivy strangling its walls and the roof sagging under the weight of neglect. The door stood slightly ajar, creaking as it swayed in the wind. I hesitated at the threshold, a knot tightening in my stomach. But my curiosity won out. I had to see this place for myself. I stepped inside, the darkness swallowing me whole. The air was thick with dust and the scent of damp wood. My flashlight flickered as I made my way through the entryway, illuminating faded wallpaper peeling away from the walls and furniture draped in sheets that looked like ghosts in the dim light. As I moved deeper into the house, I felt a disconcerting stillness settle around me. Every creak of the floorboards sounded deafening in the silence. I passed through rooms filled with odd trinkets, jars of herbs, strange stones, and pages of parchment scattered across tables, as if someone had left in haste. Suddenly, I heard a soft, eerie sound like a distant whisper, barely discernible yet laden with a sense of urgency. I froze, heart racing. The air seemed to thicken, and the shadows around me deepened. The sense of being watched washed over me once more, heavy and suffocating. I turned to leave, but a flicker of movement caught my eye. My breath hitched in my throat as I saw a shadow flitting across the wall, a figure clothed in darkness. For a brief moment, I thought I saw the outline of a woman, her cloak billowing around her like a living shadow. Then she was gone, swallowed by the gloom. I stumbled back, the air around me heavy with an indescribable energy. The shadows felt alive, pulsating with a presence that sent a jolt of fear through me. I darted for the door, the oppressive darkness clawing at my heels. I burst into the night, gasping for breath as I fled from the witch's house. The village of Eldergrove was transformed in the moonlight, its shadows stretching and shifting like living creatures. I raced toward my car, the sound of my pounding heart drowning out the whispers that seemed to follow me. As I reached the vehicle, I glanced back one last time, the witch's house looming behind me, a dark silhouette against the night sky. I threw myself into the car, slamming the door shut as if to shield myself from the malevolence I had encountered. The engine roared to life, and I sped away, the village receding into the distance. Yet, as I drove, the image of that shadow lingered in my mind, a haunting reminder of the witch who was said to dwell within the remnants of Eldergrove. I had come seeking a story, but what I found was something far darker than I could have ever imagined. Eldergrove was a place steeped in mystery, its shadows alive, waiting for the next curious soul to wander too close. As I glanced in the rearview mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that the witch's shadow was still watching, lurking just beyond the veil of night, a reminder that some mysteries are best left undisturbed. I don't know why I agreed to take this trip. Maybe it was a desire to disconnect, to escape the pressure of city life. Maybe I just wanted to be alone, but not in the familiar way, sitting in my apartment surrounded by reminders of a life I wasn't sure I was happy with. A friend had suggested it, a cabin in the middle of nowhere. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just silence, complete isolation. The idea sounded appealing at first, but now that I was here, standing in front of the small wooden structure, I felt uneasy. It was late afternoon, and the sun hung low, casting long shadows across the ground. The forest surrounded the cabin like a wall, dense and dark, making it feel as if the outside world had disappeared the moment I stepped out of my car. The cabin was small, barely more than one room. There was a narrow porch with a single rocking chair, and the windows were covered with thin curtains that fluttered slightly in the breeze. The air smelled different here, a mix of pine and damp earth, clean but heavy. It felt thick in my lungs, almost too much to breathe. I unlocked the door, the old wood creaking as I stepped inside. The interior was as simple as I expected: a small bed with a worn quilt, a wood-burning stove, a table with a single chair, and a few shelves lined with dusty books and mismatched dishes. There was no electricity, just a few oil lamps scattered around the room. I set my bag down on the bed and took a deep breath. It was quiet, unnervingly quiet. No cars in the distance, no voices, no hum of electricity, just the wind whispering through the trees. The first few hours passed uneventfully. I explored the cabin, unpacked my things, and tried to settle into the idea of being alone in the wilderness. The sun dipped lower, and the shadows stretched farther, until the forest outside the windows became a solid wall of black. I lit one of the oil lamps, the warm glow filling the small space, casting flickering shadows on the walls. As night fell, the silence grew heavier. It wasn't peaceful, though. It felt thick, almost oppressive. I hadn't realized how much noise I was used to, even at night: the distant hum of traffic, the murmur of people outside my window. Here, there was nothing. Around midnight, I heard it. A faint sound, barely noticeable at first, like something tapping against the cabin. I froze, straining to hear. It came again: tap, 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 slow and deliberate. My first thought was a branch brushing against the side of the cabin, but the sound was too rhythmic, too intentional. I stood up, moving quietly to the window, and peeked through the curtain. The darkness outside was impenetrable, the forest a wall of shadow. I couldn't see anything, but the tapping continued, steady, like fingers drumming against the wood. I pulled the curtain back farther, my heart pounding. Nothing. Just the darkness pressing in. I forced myself to step away from the window, telling myself it was nothing. The wind, maybe, or an animal. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the sound, but it only grew louder, more insistent. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, the tapping seemed to get closer, more persistent. It wasn't coming from one spot anymore. It was all around, moving from wall to wall, like something was circling the cabin, searching for a way in. By 2 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and grabbed the oil lamp, holding it up as I walked toward the door. My hand hovered over the knob. Part of me wanted to open it, to confront whatever was out there, to prove to myself it was nothing. But I didn't. But instead, I locked it. The tapping stopped, just like that. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating. I stood there for a long moment, listening. My breath was shallow, my heart racing. Nothing moved outside. I went back to bed, telling myself I was imagining things. The isolation was playing tricks on my mind, making me hear things that weren't there. I lay down, trying to calm myself. But then, the floorboards creaked. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The sound was unmistakable, soft, deliberate footsteps coming from inside the cabin. My pulse thundered in my ears as I gripped the edge of the blanket, too terrified to move. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, like someone or something was walking carefully through the room. It was impossible. I was alone. I had checked the entire cabin earlier. There was no one else here. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps continued, moving closer to the bed. I forced myself to sit up, clutching the oil lamp. The flame flickered, casting long, wavering shadows across the room. My eyes scanned the space, but there was nothing. No one. Just the empty room, the small bed, the table. The footsteps stopped. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The silence stretched out, thick and unbearable. I sat there, clutching the lamp, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. After what felt like hours, I finally lay back down, too exhausted to keep sitting up. The silence returned, broken only by the sound of my own breathing. Eventually, I drifted off, though my sleep was fitful and plagued with strange, half-formed dreams of shadows moving through the cabin. When I woke up, the sun was just starting to rise, casting pale light through the windows. I sat up, my heart still racing from the night before. The cabin was quiet, just as it had been when I arrived. I tried to shake off the lingering fear, telling myself it had been nothing more than my mind playing tricks on me. But when I stood up, I noticed something. The front door was open. Not just unlocked wide open, as if someone had pushed it open and walked out into the morning light. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at it, my mind racing. I had locked it. I was sure I had locked it, but there it was, swinging gently on its hinges. I took a step toward the door, my hands trembling. The ground outside was soft from the morning dew, and as I stepped onto the porch, I saw them footprints. Large, heavy, unmistakably human footprints, leading away from the cabin and disappearing into the trees. I stared at them for a long time, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing, because the footprints weren't mine. I stood frozen at the threshold, my heart thudding in my chest as my eyes traced the muddy footprints leading into the forest. They were clear and deliberate, each step pressed deeply into the damp earth. Whoever had left them must have been standing right outside the cabin, close enough to hear my every breath during the night. The footprints were unnerving, large and heavy, almost too large to belong to a regular person. I felt a chill run down my spine as I stared at the tracks, each one leading deeper into the thick woods that surrounded the cabin. The trees loomed tall and close, their gnarled branches twisting together like skeletal hands, forming a canopy that blocked out most of the early morning light. The darkness beneath them felt suffocating, like an entity in its own right. I stepped back into the cabin, slamming the door shut behind me and turning the lock again, though I knew now that it didn't offer any real protection. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had happened. I had locked the door before bed. I knew I had. So how had it opened in the night? And who or what had been inside with me? The cabin, which had once seemed like a quaint retreat, now felt like a cage. The walls seemed to close in around me, thick with the weight of the previous night's events. Every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet, every shift in the wind outside sent my nerves on edge. My thoughts darted back to the footsteps I had heard during the night, moving slowly around the cabin, growing closer and closer. They hadn't been a dream. They had been real. I tried to tell myself that it must have been an animal, something large like a bear, maybe. But I knew that wasn't true. The footsteps had been too deliberate, too human, and the footprints outside, they were definitely not left by any animal. The door creaked wider, revealing the same yawning darkness that had haunted me since my arrival. I felt a chill wash over me, and panic surged as I scrambled to my feet, instinct telling me to run. But before I could move, I heard a whisper soft and sinister, wrapping around me like a cold hand. Stay it beckoned, and I felt rooted to the porch, paralyzed by fear. In an instant, I turned and fled into the woods, plunging into the underbrush and leaving the cabin behind. The tapping faded into the distance, but the feeling of being hunted remained, a chilling reminder that the isolation I had sought had only revealed the lurking shadows waiting for me to let my guard down. It was a sweltering summer afternoon when I found myself on a road that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon, flanked by flat, barren fields that whispered secrets of decay. I had taken a wrong turn somewhere near a forgotten town, and my phone had surrendered to the relentless desertion of signal. With each mile, the landscape morphed into a surreal painting of desolation. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and the sun hung in the sky like a judgmental eye, glaring down at me. I pulled into a small diner, a rusted sign creaking overhead, proclaiming it as Mabel's Place. It was a rundown establishment, the paint peeling off the walls, and the neon lights flickering with a ghostly glow. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a couple of rusty pickup trucks and a solitary sedan. I stepped inside, the door swinging open with a jarring squeal, and was greeted by the smell of grease and something more acrid lurking beneath it. The atmosphere was thick, like time had congealed here, and the dim light cast long shadows across the faded linoleum floor. The diner was nearly empty, with just a few patrons scattered at the far booths, their faces obscured by the dim lighting. The waitress, an older woman with deep lines etched into her sun-weathered face, eyed me with a mix of curiosity and suspicion as I settled into a booth near the back. I glanced around, noticing the worn-out jukebox in the corner, its once vibrant colors now muted and peeling. It stood there, silent, like it had been forgotten along with everything else in this forsaken place. After a few minutes of waiting, the waitress approached, setting down a glass of water before me. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice grating against the stillness. I ordered a burger, wanting something to fill the gnawing emptiness in my stomach. As I waited, I could feel the weight of the other patrons' stares. A man in a faded baseball cap sat at the counter, his gaze flicking to me every now and then. I tried to ignore the prickling sensation creeping up my spine and focused on the cracked vinyl menu in front of me. The food arrived and I dug in, the burger surprisingly decent despite the unsettling ambience. Just as I was about to take another bite, the door swung open with a bang, rattling the framed pictures on the walls. In walked a couple, their laughter echoing off the walls, slicing through the oppressive atmosphere. They were young, full of life, a stark contrast to the rest of us. They sat at the booth across from mine, oblivious to the tension that had settled in the diner. I couldn't help but listen in as they bantered, their voices bright and carefree. But the older patrons shifted in their seats, their eyes narrowing with an unsettling intensity. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I forced myself to focus on my meal, trying to drown out the growing sense of discomfort. Then it happened. The couple's laughter ceased abruptly, and the man turned to look at the waitress, his expression shifting from joy to confusion. "What's wrong with everyone?" he asked, laughter still lingering in his tone but fading fast. The waitress's gaze hardened. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice low and strained. "It's not safe." The couple exchanged glances, the playfulness evaporating from their demeanor. "What do you mean?" the woman asked, her voice suddenly tense. "You should leave," the waitress insisted, her eyes darting to the patrons around us. "It's best if you just go." But instead of leaving, the couple laughed it off. "Oh, come on, it's just a diner," the man said, his bravado faltering as he caught the wary expressions of the older customers. I felt the atmosphere shift, a tangible tension tightening around us like a noose. The couple's laughter faded as they glanced at each other, uncertainty flickering across their faces. They got up to leave, and in that moment, I felt an inexplicable urge to join them. I wanted to escape the suffocating air of Mabel's Place, but I was frozen in place, rooted to my seat. Just as they stepped outside, the man suddenly stopped, his face twisting in confusion. "What's that?" he muttered, pointing at something in the distance. The woman squinted, leaning forward as if trying to discern what he was seeing. The patrons turned their heads, the dread palpable. I leaned closer to the window, my heart racing, and squinted into the blinding light. In the distance, I could see a figure moving slowly, almost imperceptibly. It was just a dark spot against the shimmering heat waves, but something about its movements sent a jolt of fear through me. Then it stopped. It stopped. The couple stood transfixed, their expressions shifting from curiosity to horror. The man took a step back, his laughter long gone, replaced by a look of sheer panic. I wanted to scream for them to get back inside, but the words died in my throat. And then, without warning, the figure darted forward faster than I could comprehend. It was a blur, a shadow rushing toward them, and the couple turned to run, panic overtaking them. They sprinted back to the door, but the diner seemed to close in around us. The door was ajar, swinging wildly, and the waitress shouted something I couldn't hear over the pounding of my heart. I was still sitting at the booth, paralyzed as the couple rushed in, slamming the door behind them. The waitress's face had gone pale, and the patrons were all staring at the door, breaths held, like we were all part of a grotesque tableau. The couple was breathing hard, their eyes wide with fear, and for a brief moment, I felt a spark of hope they had made it back inside. But the room fell eerily silent, and I could feel the weight of all those gazes upon us, as if we were all trapped in some sinister game. The man, visibly shaken, turned to the others. What the hell was that? But no one responded. The waitress's eyes darted toward the door, and a creeping dread slithered through the air. Without warning, the power flickered and then went out, plunging the diner into darkness. A few seconds later, the emergency lights flickered on, casting a sickly yellow glow over the room. In that half-light, the faces of the patrons contorted into masks of fear and unease. The couple huddled close together, whispering frantically, but I could barely hear them over the pounding of my heart. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I felt rooted to the spot, unable to move. I could sense something was terribly wrong, and as the lights continued to flicker, it felt like time had begun to stretch. In the silence, we all waiting for something to happen, waiting for that shadow to crash through the door. I could feel my breath quickening, panic rising within me, and I glanced around the diner, searching for any sign of safety. But the oppressive air was thick with dread, and the patrons began shifting uneasily in their seats. Just then, a loud bang echoed outside, like thunder rumbling across the sky. The couple screamed, and the waitress rushed to the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. "Stay here," she yelled, pushing against the door as though trying to keep something at bay. But the door swung open with a sudden rush, and in that moment, chaos erupted. The couple bolted toward the kitchen, screaming, but the patrons remained rooted to their seats, their faces blank, as if they were part of a macabre play. I found my voice, shouting for the waitress, for anyone to do something, but the words felt meaningless. The shadow darted past the door, and then I saw it, a twisted, elongated figure with hollow eyes and a grin that stretched too wide, a mockery of a human face. It lurked in the distance, lurking just out of reach, watching, waiting. Then the lights flickered once more, and I took a step back, my heart racing, fear clenching around me like a vice. The figure vanished into the night, leaving only a lingering chill in the air. The waitress stumbled back, and with one last terrified glance at the door, she slammed it shut, locking it. But the terror hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The diners were all still, eyes glazed over, and for a brief moment, I felt as if I had stepped into a nightmare. I had to leave. I had to get out of there. As I stood to leave, the power flickered back on, and the jukebox played a haunting tune while the patrons stirred, their eyes vacant and hungry, revealing the diner as a trap spun from desperation. One last glance at the frozen couple filled me with despair, and I ran outside, feeling a shadow chase me as I sped away. Mabel's place faded into the distance, but that feeling of being watched lingered, and I could have sworn I heard laughter echoing in the night, a chilling reminder that some places are best left undisturbed. I never thought I'd end up here, stranded in a dilapidated motel in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by endless fields and the scent of decay. It was supposed to be a quick stop on my road trip, just a place to rest for the night. But as I stood at the reception desk, a chill ran down my spine. The clerk, an elderly man with deep-set eyes and a grin that stretched just a bit too wide, was the first sign that something was off. "Just you?" he asked, his voice raspy, like gravel scraping against metal. I nodded, uneasy under his gaze. "Room 7. First floor, near the back." "Nice view of the fields," he said, handing me a rusty key. I could only muster a weak smile in return. As I made my way to my room, I noticed how the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting erratic shadows on the cracked linoleum. The air was stale, thick with a musty odor that seemed to cling to the walls. I reached my room and pushed the door open, wincing at the creak it made. Inside, the room was sparse: a double bed with stained sheets, a small table with a cracked mirror, and a TV that looked like it hadn't been turned on in years. I tossed my bag onto the bed and decided to take a shower to wash off the grime of the road. The water sputtered before finally coming out in a trickle, the temperature fluctuating between scalding hot and icy cold. As I stood there, eyes closed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Once I dried off, I put on some comfortable clothes and sat on the bed, scrolling through my phone for something to distract myself. The signal was weak, so I turned off the screen and glanced at the room. It felt as though the walls were closing in, and I had this growing sense of dread. With no other option, I decided to venture outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple, and the field behind the motel swayed gently in the breeze. I wandered, my feet crunching on the dry grass, until I stumbled upon an old barn. Its door hung ajar, creaking ominously as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Shadows danced in the corners, and the scent of rust and old hay filled my nostrils. I took a step further in, my curiosity piqued. On the far wall, I noticed strange markings, scratches carved into the wood, forming patterns that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. I reached out to touch them, but something moved in the corner of my eye. I spun around, heart racing, but found nothing. Shaking off the unease, I took a few more steps, but the barn was eerily silent. Then, I heard a soft whisper, barely discernible, like the rustle of leaves. Help me, it was faint but unmistakable. I hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. Silence answered. The urge to flee was strong, but something compelled me to stay. I stepped further in, searching for the source of the voice. Suddenly, the floor creaked beneath me, and I stumbled, catching myself just in time. My heart raced as I glanced around, the whisper echoing in my mind. I had to get out of there. I turned and rushed back toward the exit, but as I reached the door, it slammed shut. Panic surged through me, and I pulled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Let me out," I shouted, my voice breaking. The whisper came again, louder this time. "Help me." My pulse quickened, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned slowly, my breath hitching in my throat. The shadows in the barn seemed to shift, coalescing into a figure that was indistinct but undeniably there. I could see the outline of a face, twisted in pain, its mouth moving but not producing any sound. I was frozen in fear, rooted to the spot. The figure seemed to reach out, its hands stretching toward me. I finally found my voice. "What do you want?" I croaked. "Help me," it repeated, the whisper echoing in my ears. I stumbled back against the door, heart racing, desperate to escape this nightmare. But I had to know. How, I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Suddenly, the barn's walls began to close in, and the figure surged toward me, dissolving into shadows that wrapped around my ankles. I felt them pulling me down, the cold grip wrapping tighter as I struggled to break free. The last thing I saw was the figure's anguished face, its eyes pleading. In a moment of adrenaline, I pushed against the door with all my strength, and it swung open, flinging me into the night air. I stumbled out and collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath, the cool night air a stark contrast to the oppressive heat inside the barn. I didn't stop to look back. I ran toward my room, heart pounding in my chest. The motel loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the starless sky. I rushed inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it tight. I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath, mind racing. But the peace was short-lived. The whisper returned, louder now, pounding against my skull. "Help me." I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my palms against my ears, but it didn't help. The sound enveloped me, drowning out my thoughts. I opened my eyes and the room seemed to shimmer, the shadows deepening, stretching toward me like dark tendrils. In a desperate bid, I grabbed my phone, hoping to find some sort of signal. The screen flickered, then went dark. I cursed under my breath and tossed it aside, feeling utterly alone. The whisper transformed into a scream, filling the room with a cacophony of terror. "Help me," it was a plea. And suddenly I understood. The figure wasn't just a specter, it was trapped, just like me. The shadows twisted and formed a doorway, beckoning me to step through. I hesitated, fear clashing with the need to help whoever or whatever was trapped inside. But as the whispers crescendoed, I felt a surge of primal fear. I grabbed my bag and threw open the door. My heart raced as I dashed through the narrow hallway, the oppressive air pressing down on me. The fluorescent lights flickered violently, casting frantic shadows that danced along the walls. The whispers followed me, filling my mind with despair and urgency, urging me to return, to save the lost souls within. I reached the exit, fumbling with the handle. The door creaked open, and I burst into the night, gasping for fresh air. I didn't stop to look back, feeling the weight of the motel's darkness behind me. My car was parked a short distance away, and I sprinted toward it, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The gravel crunched beneath my feet, and I could feel the whispers clawing at my back, trying to pull me into the shadows. I reached my car, yanked open the door, and jumped inside. My hands trembled as I fumbled for the keys, finally managing to start the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness as I sped away, the motel fading into the distance. The whispers dulled to a faint echo, but I knew they were still there, lingering like a shadow in my mind. I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time, half expecting to see a figure standing in the parking lot, but it was empty, just the endless expanse of darkness. As I drove away, the oppressive weight lifted from my shoulders, but a lingering dread settled in my mind like a thick fog. Each mile I put between myself and that cursed motel brought bittersweet relief, yet the echoes of anguished whispers haunted me. The images of trapped souls and their desperate cries etched themselves into my memory, making it impossible to forget. I clenched the steering wheel, resolute in my decision never to return, even as a part of me felt the dark pull of that place, beckoning me to confront the horrors I had narrowly escaped. Days turned into weeks, and although I tried to fill my life with normalcy, the unease never truly left me. I found myself glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see a familiar figure standing just beyond the reach of my headlights. At night, the shadows in my room seemed to shift and breathe, igniting a primal fear that kept me from sleeping. The whispers had woven themselves into the fabric of my existence, a reminder of the lives forever entwined with that wretched motel. I often questioned my resolve, wondering if I had made the right choice by fleeing instead of seeking to help those who remained trapped. But deep down, I knew some shadows were meant to stay hidden, their darkness too deep for the light of day. And so, I moved through life, always aware that I carried a piece of that night within me, a reminder of the thin line that separates freedom from the abyss. I shouldn't have taken the detour. I knew at the moment I turned off the main highway and onto this godforsaken stretch of road. The GPS promised me it'd save an hour, maybe more, and I had been in a hurry to get to the hotel before midnight. A long drive, a peaceful night's sleep, and then the last leg of the journey. That was the plan. But that plan had gone to hell. It's been hours since I turned off, and I haven't seen a single sign of life. No cars, no houses, not even a flickering light in the distance. Just the same unchanging road, the same cracked asphalt under my tires, the same dull, lifeless terrain stretching out in every direction, disappearing into the black horizon. At first, I thought it was just the isolation messing with me. I'd been driving for so long, alone, without so much as a mile marker to track my progress. But then the GPS lost signal, the phone switched to no service, and the world outside my car went eerily still. It's not that it was quiet, there's always the hum of the engine and the hiss of the tires on the road, but there's something wrong about this silence. It presses against my skull, thick and smothering. The road doesn't even seem to curve. No matter how long I drive, it just stretches out like a straight line that goes on forever. No signs, no exits, and now no sense of time. I check the dashboard clock, and it's frozen, midnight. But I know it's been at least an hour since I last checked. Something's off, and I don't know how to fix it. My mind is racing, thinking of all the logical explanations. Maybe I missed a turn. Maybe I'm just overtired and my mind's playing tricks on me. But when I glance at the fuel gauge, my stomach knots. I should have used more gas by now. I've been driving for hours, but the needle hasn't moved. I tighten my grip on the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. Maybe I just need to focus, concentrate. Maybe this is all just in my head, and if I keep going, I'll reach somewhere, anywhere, that makes sense. That's when I see the figure. I blink, hard, because I'm sure it's just my mind playing tricks again. But no. Up ahead, standing right on the edge of the road, there's a figure. Tall, motionless, silhouetted against the black night. There's nothing else around, no car or sign or building, just this person standing alone. I slow down instinctively, the car's headlights washing over them. As I get closer, I see it's a man. Or at least I think it is. He's facing away from me, his back to the road, hands hanging loosely at his sides. His clothes are odd. They're dark, but the style feels old, outdated like something from another time. A long coat, heavy boots, a wide-brimmed hat. I can't make out much else in the dim light, but something about him makes my skin crawl. I don't stop. I don't even slow down as much as I want to. I just keep driving, eyes locked on the rearview mirror once I pass him. He doesn't move. He just stands there, as though he was placed there like a forgotten statue on the side of the road. My heart is racing, my fingers white-knuckled around the steering wheel. I tell myself not to look back again, but I can't help it. The rearview mirror shows nothing. He's gone. I press my foot harder on the gas, my car speeding up, but the road remains the same, endless and dark. The clock still reads midnight. Then I see another figure. This time, it's a woman. She's standing in the same way just off the side of the road, facing away, arms hanging at her sides. Same dark clothes, same eerie stillness. I pass her too, my hands trembling now. I don't look back. I don't want to know if she's still there or not. What the hell is happening? I glance at my phone again, though I know it's pointless. No signal. The map is frozen on the last bit of road it captured before the world seemed to fall away. I toss the phone onto the passenger seat in frustration. That's when the thumping starts. It's faint at first, like a muffled beat. It comes from somewhere under the car, or maybe inside it. A rhythmic thud, thud, thud that grows louder with each passing minute. My heart pounds in sync with it, my mind scrambling to figure out what it is. A flat tire? Something caught under the car? I pull over, the car shuddering to a stop. The thumping doesn't stop. It's louder now, pulsing through the floor of the car, vibrating up into my chest. I don't want to get out. Every instinct I have is screaming at me to stay in the car, to lock the doors and keep driving, but I can't ignore it. I need to see what's making that sound. I grab the flashlight from the glove compartment, the beam of light shaky as I step out into the cold night air. It's even quieter out here, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I can hear my own breathing, too loud, too fast. The thumping continues, steady and relentless. I walk around the car, shining the light on the tires. They're fine. I crouch down, peering under the vehicle. There's nothing there. No branch caught in the wheel well, no visible damage. Just empty road stretching out behind me and in front of me. I stand up, my breath coming in sharp gasps now. The thumping hasn't stopped. If anything, it's louder. It's not coming from the car. It's coming from inside the trunk. My hand trembles as I reach for the trunk's release lever. My mind is racing with every terrible possibility. Maybe someone's in there. Maybe something got in there when I wasn't looking. But that's insane. I've been driving this whole time. There's no way. The trunk pops open with a metallic creak, and I shine the flashlight inside. It's empty. The thumping stops. I slam the trunk shut and sprint back to the driver's seat, slamming the door behind me, locking it, and jamming the key into the ignition. The engine roars to life and I floor the gas pedal, tires squealing as I race down the road. The clock still says midnight. The road is still straight, still endless, still the same. And then, in the distance, I see more figures. Dozens of them. Standing on both sides of the road, evenly spaced like gravestones in a forgotten cemetery, all facing away from me, all perfectly still. I speed up, heart in my throat, hands shaking on the wheel. They blur past me, one by one, too fast for me to make out any details, but I know they're all the same. Every figure. Every motionless silhouette. Waiting. Watching, though I can't see their faces. I drive for what feels like hours. The road never ends. The clock never changes. Midnight forever. That's when I see the gas station. I almost miss it because it appears so suddenly on the side of the road. The bright neon sign flickers weakly, casting an eerie glow over the empty parking lot. It's old, like something from the 70s, with a single rusty pump and a grimy windowed building that looks like it hasn't been maintained in decades. I should keep driving. Every instinct tells me to stay away, but the gas gauge finally drops a fraction, and the realization hits me like a punch to the gut I'm running low on fuel. I pull into the parking lot, the gravel crunching beneath the tires, and roll up to the pump. My hand shakes as I turn off the engine and step out of the car, the night air heavy and cold around me. The pump is ancient, the kind you have to turn on manually, and I fumble with it, trying to figure out how it works. There's a small bell on the door of the building, and I hear it jingle faintly as I glance inside. The lights are dim, casting long shadows across the floor. Behind the counter, a man sits slumped over, his back to me, motionless. I hesitate, but I need gas. I approach the door, my fingers brushing the cold handle, and push it open. The bell jingles again, louder this time, echoing in the empty room. "Hello," I call out, my voice sounding thin and nervous in the still air. The man doesn't respond. I step inside, the door swinging shut behind me with a soft click. The air in the building smells stale, like dust and old oil. There are shelves filled with outdated snacks and magazines, all of them coated in a fine layer of grime. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead, flickering slightly. "Excuse me," I take a step closer to the counter, but the man doesn't move. Something about the way he's sitting sends a chill down my spine. I swallow hard and inch closer, the sound of my footsteps too loud in the quiet room. Then I see it. The pool of dark liquid spreading slowly across the floor from beneath his chair. My breath catches in my throat, and I stumble back, my heart pounding in my chest. It's thick, almost black in the dim light. I don't need to get closer to know what it is. I turn to leave. I don't think. I just run.